Hola, everybody. This is Dr. Gerardo Gauthier-Zayas, your host and founder for Conversation Café. This is a podcast dedicated to fostering, understanding, building connections, and really inspiring actions through compelling conversations that we create as a space to explore transformational leadership, systemic equity, and inclusion, guided by our guests' lived and professional experiences. Topics on Conversation Café will be anchored in transformational leadership, systemic equity, community engagement, and restorative justice. Some discussions may be challenging, even uncomfortable, but they're essential for growth. By sharing firsthand stories, we encounter misinformation and harmful narratives, shedding light on the impact of intolerance and inequity. These conversations highlight the policies and behaviors that marginalize communities while emphasizing the resilience and insights of those most affected. At Conversation Cafe, we are your allies in understanding and embracing diversity. Together, we'll explore how differences shape our workplace communities and place of worship, presenting opportunities for learning and growth. Silence and inaction only perpetuate harm. This is our chance to create inclusive environments that uplift everyone. Our space is being held to equip you with knowledge, evidence, and strategies to inform how you might become a more present ally in the walk towards equality through creating systemic equity infrastructures to sustain meaningful changes and impact for all. We focus on empowering listeners with actionable insights to create brave spaces where equity and inclusion thrive. Join us as we amplify voices, share transformative stories, and navigate the complexities of diversity, equity, and social justice. Sit back, listen, and let these conversations inspire you to become a force for positive change. Welcome again to Conversation Café, where every story matters and every voice can spark transformation. For today's episode on Conversation Café, I'm excited to share with you and introduce our guest, Peter Rojas. Peter is the director of Intercultural Center at Brandeis University, and he has a history and passion for DEI work that is deeply personal and really shaped by his own challenges and obstacles within his journey. As a higher education practitioner, Peter's goal is to provide opportunities for students of all backgrounds to prepare for the next stage of their lives and create a sense of community. Peter's career has taken him across the country, allowing him to explore various roles in higher education and nonprofit work. He began at the University of Indiana, Indianapolis as a coordinator for fraternity and sorority life, drawing from his own experiences as a member of the Phi Iota Alpha fraternity. He then moved to Los Angeles to manage nonprofit organizations focused on helping underrepresented communities enter the tech industry, particularly supporting students at community colleges and high schools. He has earned his bachelor's from University of Massachusetts Lowell and his master's in higher education administration from Florida International University. And excited to report that Peter is currently enrolled in Boston College's doctoral program. Conversation Cafe is honest, courageous conversations about leadership, equity, authenticity, and power in public serving institutions. The goal is not to showcase best practices, but to really surface structural realities and invite accountability. You are joining this conversation as a systems translator, which to me means someone whose lived experiences and professional roles illuminate how institutions function. And our guiding premises is that leadership really is shaped by systems and not just individuals. In addition to lived experiences, it really is about leadership intelligence and not anecdote. So I think for me, equity requires institutional redesign and not rhetorical commitment. And today, what we're going to do in our conversation with Peter is we're going to move through experiences, we're going to move through analysis, and we're going to actually have some reflection, and really by leaning into the themes of belonging versus power, such as things like where inclusion stops short of authority, other things such as other themes of institutional design, such as potentially how structures, roles, and decision-making reveal true priorities. Other themes could be leadership readiness, such as what institutions actually prepare people to do. And then lastly, the last theme is lived experiences as leadership capital. And what this truly is about is when lived experiences is valued and when it's dismissed. So we want to make sure that when we start these conversations, that we really do kind of come to the table with openness. And again, we're not here to always agree, but we're always to kind of unpack things and look at the different angles, even with people who have aligned values, right? So I think this is the lesson here, and I really appreciate it. So without further ado, Peter, welcome to Conversation Cafe. I'm glad you're here. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm definitely here. My cafecito here, ready to go. I know it's at 3 o'clock time frame for us, so I'm super excited to have a good conversation.
Great, great. And also, I think one of the things that I want to first start off with, I really appreciate that in the higher education space, which we're both in. I know I've met some peers, right, that work in the spaces, but it's not like a regular routine. It's like a once in a while kind of thing, and it's the exception to the rule, and not, it's not the norm. It's the exception to the rule. So I think for me, when we have conversations about specifically today's topic, I think to me it makes sense for have two people to just have openness about this conversation. So I think without further ado, I want to just jump into the questions. Is that okay, Peter? Perfect. So let's start with the first question. Where do you think institutional commitments to belonging stop short of power?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall right now we're in a interesting time frame, especially here in the United States with everything politically occurring and how that's kind of disseminated into institutions and how they view DEI in this current state, right? So I think for me, when I start thinking about where we are fulfilling the aspect of belonging, right? I think it's we are invited into those spaces in terms of administrators or students to talk about their experiences, their culture, however you want to define what DEI means to them. I think overall, where it stops short is sometimes we're at the table where we're not given the time or space to actually speak at the table, right? Or we don't really necessarily have the right guests to sit at those other tables to advocate for us. And I think that's the hard part when you start thinking about those situations. And I think about it too in a student's perspective, right? They're invited to a lot of meetings with board of trustees or administration, and they're allowed to speak, right? But then the next question is, are they now empowered to create some sort of structural change to make sure their experience is better in and outside of the classroom? So I think overall, when we start thinking about it, we do a fairly good job in terms of providing that space for expression and celebration, right? But overall, I think the conversation is for change. It's more about the structural change and what does that look like, and that's super layered in terms of the people in power, and also thinking about it too, is just like, how do you define DEI? If I ask you that, like, we can go down the intersectionality of different identities and what's more
Correct.
important for the institution. Or is it simply about race and ethnicity? Are we talking about gender and sexuality? Are we talking about other intricacies that kind of fall into that? And everyone's gonna have a different answer. Everyone's gonna have a different opinion. And I think it's then another layer for institutions to figure out what's the most important thing for them in terms of how they run their organization.
Yeah, I think you bring up a valid point. I know, in my time in higher education, most of my experiences, at least in the administrative side, right? I mean, teaching in the administrative side, but on the administrative side has been in community colleges. And I think for me in Massachusetts, when I've worked in these community colleges spaces, you bring up a very valid point in relation to the role of the student and the voice of the student and where that voice is placed, welcomed, accepted. I'm talking about once a student comes to the table and says something, how much prepping or upholding the student to come into the space of the ultimate power of an organization, because this is where it sits. How do we prep them to be actively involved and not just a performative? We have a student because we're required to. Enjoy that you unpack that because we don't talk about that enough. On the flip side of that coin, I think it's the same thing for employees. You can almost run a parallel story based on the person's identities, right? The intersection of their social identities does create the space or the permission to be in the space. That's one part. But and then once you're in the space, how do you remain in there? And how do you remain centered to your voice while challenging a room that truly has the power to create systemic change? So I think I want to kind of commend you on that point. So thank you for that. I think as a follow up to that, what do you think like organizational structures reveal when our institutions like truly values what does leadership readiness mean? And I'm talking about leadership readiness in relation to the same parallel thing. So we can talk about students and their role because of the role that you have, but also as professionals in the field, especially if some of us I spent most of my time in community serving institutions, meaning the community has been embedded in the names. So whether I was in healthcare or higher education, to me, I have a very high standard when I hear any organization that has community in the name because it implies to me. that you are there for who you serve. And regardless of what triggers and mechanisms kind of hold you hostage of what you can and can't do as an organization, we still have the obligation to ask the questions and follow up with reasonable responses to say that it's valuable or not. Can you talk a little bit about that in your experience, in both of those sides of the coin?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I kind of as you're speaking, I was thinking about how the students, particularly at my institution right now that I currently work at Brandeis, we're built on the value of social justice, right? And I think the cool thing that I've learned about the history about this institution are the students and their ability to show that activism, right? So we've had two significant sit-ins in the history of this institution where the students understood that they have the power to make change. And I think ultimately the obstacle is convincing and getting the buy-in for everyone to feel that way, right? And I'm not talking about not only the what happens outside the classroom, right? These sit-ins were about like, look, we need more faculty of color, we need more structure and more essence about diversity within the curriculum. So they understand that their institution that they are investing in is going to provide them with the opportunity after they graduate, right? So I think they're trying to get the best 4 years, 5 years of their lives, right? But also be educated by the right people that care about what they're talking about, especially on the social justice construct of what it is. Now, shifting into that, I think as an employee, right? Sometimes when you're finding a job, you're trying to find a job, right? I think I'm trying to find a job, yes, right? I think anyone who's in higher education either wants to be in it because they like their ego to be stroked, right? And they want people to listen to what they're saying, or they generally want to be in the trenches with the students and support them. And what does that look like? I think for myself, there's certain things you can look into at the institution based on what they publicize, right? And where are they putting their money and their resources? I think when we start talking about DEI or just the diversity aspect behind it, are they trying to provide resources to create that enrichment outside the classroom, right? So like a cultural center like mine, or student engagement or student involvement, to provide that food, fun, and fashion, as I like to say. My mentor once said that, and I started laughing because I think that's yeah, what people think that all we're about, right? Over are they trying to implement or embed core curricular values within that, right? Within diversity and teaching these students within the classroom. I think the equity part to it, I think is thinking about it in two frames. Is it grant funded or is it embedded in their operation budget?
Right.
Right? Is it like we'll see type of thing, or we're committed to making sure that we're providing the right resources to make things equitable? So I think those are things like the word initiative always bothered me because it always had this connotation of like we'll see, right? So
Yes, maybe.
well maybe we'll see,
Yeah,
right?
maybe we'll see. Yeah, no, I 100% agree
Just
with that.
maybe, but there's a lot of pressure when, especially grant funding, because you got to provide the right data points. But I think that's so subjective in the sense where just like there, and if I provide a report to like 10 different people, they're going to look at 10 different things, right? So it's just, that's a little bit of pressure on that part. And I think overall, the other thing I think about is like expertise. Am I in the room being tokenized, or do you actually generally care about what I bring to the table and my opinions, right? So I know I've been in situations where I know I'm here because I am the only Latino person or person of color, and they just need me to be there to say that, hey, we did have a voice at the table for you. Or, genuinely, they do care about what I say and provide the input for them to better improve some of the structures they do have. So I think those are three things. And I think overall, especially with the expertise one, like you're not going to know until you're in the weeds of everything. It's not
That's
like you're
true.
going to know in some sort of report or reason. Like you can ask people, right? But I
Mhm.
think that's super subjective based on the person. I think I can tell you in some situations, I'm like, all right, I'm fine being in this space because I get to listen and hear what's going on, and maybe later on I could play my cards right and talk to the right people to make some moves to make the situation better. Other people don't like being in that space, right? Because I think they might be belittled, they might something like that. So I think that's just an emotional check for you and figuring things out. But in terms of the other two components, you can definitely see how the institution runs certain programs and different initiatives to see how they are able to promote what that is.
I appreciate, your approach to that because I think that you brought up another point that I don't think I've had what I'm about to say. I don't think I've had it with another male, white presenting Latino, right? Because I I can say again, I statement. This is my experience, and then I want to ask, your opinion on it. So I'm thinking that sometimes being invited to the room is one part, and then keeping us in the room is the other part, right? And sometimes we stay in the rooms because we actually can tangibly understand what it means to be seen, heard, and respected. Seen, heard, and respected as a voice, as your expertise, as your subject matter expert. And even if it's not, how can I put it? Even if it's something that might push a button or a trigger that's difficult. I know I've been in spaces where initially I go in, I try to understand the landscape, the culture, like what's going on here before I really jump in with both feet. Because unfortunately, although I present like I can walk into a space, any space, what ends up happening is, yes, you're welcome through the doorway, but and then are you really giving a seat at the raggedy, rickety table that's busted, right? When it comes to inclusion. And I always wanted to ask, like, you mentioned when we, faculty of color, or even when we were students of color, we sought out others like us because we want to create community, not just only with people who understand us, but it makes natural sense that we're going to gravitate towards what we're familiar with first. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I think that's just human nature. So I think that when you step into a room that holds all that power, for your example, when you go to the board meeting, you have the board and the president, right? So you go into the board, there's a lot of power there. And based on your experiences before walking through that doorway, it's going to determine, at least I've seen it, not just my own self, but some of my colleagues as well. I've seen that when people show up, it's show up with cautious approach. And I'm thinking, what happened to the value of authentic leadership? And I think that it doesn't, people say, of course, I could be authentic, right? But what I found really interesting is when I did my research and I interviewed 10 college presidents that were BIPOC, only two of them said, yes, I can be myself. And I'm thinking, wow, this is the president of an organization across the United States in higher education. And 8 out of 10 of them had conditional yeses, meaning yes, but yes, it's complicated. Yes, I don't want people to think I'm only catering to X, Y, and Z population, which I find really interesting because if you ask any white college president, they don't worry about that. So I think at least that's what I've seen. I've seen it and I've seen how they behave and decisions are made and how it impacts not just your BIPOC staff, but your white staff and all of us who are serving communities that might not look like us. So I think for me, I wanted to kind of just bring this angle or this part of the conversation to the front. Because I think for me, as a white presenting, very proud Puerto Rican, yeah, Wepa Bad Bunny, Wepa Benito, right?
Yeah.
But I think for me, it really is interesting that I've always wanted to kind of have a true, honest sit down with my peers and say, hey, is this me? Or what has been your experience? Because I'm not imposing my experiences. I'm just sharing it for perspective, not for convincing, right? This is how I create common good community. At least that's how I look for it. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that? Just because, again, I'm assuming that similar experiences happen to you, but I don't want to assume because we know we know what happens when we do that. What are your thoughts on all of that? Because it kind of ties into what you were mentioning just now.
Yeah. So I think it's very multi-layered, and I can dive into different moments in my career that, certain situations even cultivates an identity crisis within myself, right? I've been in those spaces where I'm the only person of color. And when I say that, I am white passing, but
Yes.
there's that essence of culture. So I'm walking into a space already thinking that they already have all these stereotypes ready for me. All right. So that's
Yes.
why I try to be early as possible so I don't get the automatic oh, here's the Latino being late. Right. Uh, Number one. I think some of the things and issues that happen when I'm in that space is that it is very burdensome in a sense where if I'm the only person there, I feel like I need to represent all BIPOC students or employees or anything like that. If I don't speak up, then I'm doing a disservice for that opportunity. And then for myself, I can't quit because when's the next time someone else is going to be in that spot? Right. So
Yes.
that's a burden that I don't really necessarily have to have on myself, but it's self-inflicted on myself. I think as I say that, it's also navigating the slippery slope of not feeling like I'm being a sellout, right? And understanding that I gotta do the politics, right? And people are not gonna understand
Okay.
what that is unless they're in my shoes or anyone that has to be in those situations. But I think overall, and it's funny because I do run a leadership program here at Brandeis, which is in commemoration of a group of students back in 1992 that they're called a push committee that created the intercultural center here. And I asked that question about like, what is a sellout? I think
Right.
overall, one student was telling me, and I resonated that, just because you represent a certain cultural ethnicity, you might have grown up in a different environment. I'm from Lowell, Massachusetts, but most of my friends growing up were all Asian, right? So I had an affinity towards that culture more than anything. But I think it was my other student that kind of said that if you're a sellout, if you're doing it to be closer to the most privileged identity in the room,
Boom.
right? I was just like, I was and honestly, I was like, "Have I ever done that?" No, but I can see the perception behind that in terms of where, like, I have to might give or take because I'm looking at the long game at the end of the day. I'm trying to be strategic, and I think and when it comes to DEI, I think that's the tension that is given in terms of individuals in the space, right? Like, you get your radical DEI person and that one that's kind of more tamed and more with the group, right?
Mhm.
I kind of lean more on that side because I understand that there's certain things I gotta give and take to make sure that I am reaching those goals. So I think that's very interesting. Now, in terms of like overall myself and the assumptions and the feelings and sentiments, I think it is very hard. I will say that, and I think it's just making sure I have the right resources for myself, making sure that I have the right individuals in the space in the room to
Mhm.
assist in those situations. And it is really collaborative in the sense, right? And I think it's individuals understanding that it takes a village to make things happen. And sometimes slow change is the best change. Although
Yes.
I will say there's some instances where we got to quickly fast and do things what we got to do, right?
And
But being in those spaces is really interesting. And I think going back onto what you're saying in terms of the authenticity part, yeah, I think I struggle with that. Right. And I think it's something that's been intriguing me lately, especially in my EDD program where I'm thinking about like what's the most effective mentorship method is, am I teaching individuals to be authentic as possible, or am I telling them to repress their identity? Am I telling them to
correct.
find a support group that is the most privileged, or your support group, or for me, my fellow Latinos and everything like that? But also at the same time, that's also a slippery slope. Just because we're skin folk don't mean we're kinfolk, right? So
Ooh, I like that.
and I
I
think
might have to borrow that one.
but also, I think when I say that, I think that's just a system that is in
Cool.
place where you don't want to have too many Latinos in the room. So we got to pick and choose. So you got to fight with you amongst the people that we are currently supposed to be
Right.
together with, right? And that creates another layer of tension that, in theory, why, but I can
Correct.
understand, especially if you're trying to advance your career and trying to be in the forefront of it. I can understand why people kind of get that fear behind that. And I've been in those experiences too. I've been at different conferences where a bunch of Latinos are together, and they mentioned that like, oh, it was actually my peer that looks like me that sold me out, right? And it's sometimes you take a step back and you reflect on it, you're like, okay, why is that? So
Correct.
there's different aspects behind that, but overall, I think I teach my students to be authentic as possible. And when I say that, it's also with the hints of like learning to navigate the system as best as possible. But it's also about the sustainability of it. Like there's so much that's so far to fake. I know people say fake it till you make it, but there's a limit to that.
Mm-mm. No, you're right. It gets
It,
tiring and
it
it
gets
takes its
tiring.
toll. 100%.
But hey, if you're one of those individuals that likes that type of that feeling, that's good for you. I know for me, like I try to find the best opportunity to be authentic as possible. Just because I know that's more sustainable. Right now, I'm going to be a little bit more happier on what I'm trying to do, and I don't want to go into work and be like, oh, okay, let me turn on that switch. Let's do what I got to do. But I think overall, and I tell students too, just like make sure when you're going to these interviews, like interview them also, like see if you are able to fit in that place. Now, are there times in your early career you might have to like be in those other spaces you may not to because you're trying to figure out ways and learn? Yeah, but all at the end of the day, when you find that career that you want, like that's a path you don't want to go down.
The word that pops into my head as you were sharing your example and talking specifically about sellout, that part of it, because there was some great carrots throughout everything you just said. And I sometimes wonder, do we recognize and understand that assimilation has to have guardrails? Because assimilation into any culture, and I'm talking about not just work culture, I'm talking about societal culture, societal norms, any assimilation at the cost of one's own identity, that is erasure without even saying what it is, right? To me, it's the beginning part of this is how countries have conquered other populations. This is how Spain conquered my wonderful Taino brothers and sisters. This is how when we were given to the United States, They were able to come in and say, well, now you're going to assimilate to English. But think about that. Even before that, we had to assimilate from our own native tongue as Boricuas to Spanish. And then we had to all of a sudden assimilate Spanish and now English. And through each of those evolutions, through assimilation, there's been a piece of the story, history lost, unless we make it a point to make sure that it lives, right? That's why the power of narrative is so incredibly powerful, because we're only taught what a system says we should be taught. That's nothing new. But what's really important, I always say, once Pandora's box is open with knowledge, you can't shut her back up. For me, as a person who lives in these circles and spaces of working with organizations to see the importance and value of culture and how we define that really makes the difference of the organizations that are treating all their employees, especially the BIPOC, differently able, any underrepresented, marginalized populations. If you do a good job to uphold the voices that are much quieter than your average, then that's a start, right? That psychological safety, really creating that space. And I think sometimes in the name of assimilation, we forget to put the guardrails of psychological safety and making sure that people understand that we don't have to agree, but we're going to have to learn is how these differences make us better together. Right. And I think for me, that's lost. That art is lost in a way that I haven't seen it. Not that I haven't seen it at all. It's just I haven't seen it consistently across my career. And being someone close that sixth decade coming up, I'm like, wow, this is crazy that, I have to think about the times that happened as opposed to, oh, yeah, it always happens. Where my white brothers and sisters, they don't have to think about that. They don't have to think about assimilation because they are what at least society says it's supposed to be the norm. And here we are kind of like, espérate, wait a minute. That's your norm. And I can assimilate to a point, but don't ask me to completely forget who I am. And I think for me, that's important. I think that when we're talking about values in leadership, I think we have to understand what does that mean on a team? What does, values aligned mean for a team? Because if that's not together, I find it really difficult to see that the best strategic plan is successful. If it's not strong through the lens of equity, that's why I want you and anybody else who comes on, like, let's talk about lived experiences, because I think that we keep them to ourselves and then we think it's us individually, as opposed to us as a collective community, right? Of professionals, of BIPOC, or whatever you want to identify in that description. What lived experiences have treated your expertise, upheld them, celebrated them, or questioned them and made you feel like, oh, there's a little bit of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, the moment you mentioned imposter syndrome, I think about even now, currently in my October, I had that 100%. I'm like, do I really belong in this space? Like,
Oh,
yeah, am I right? And that's not, it honestly has nothing to do with race or anything. That part. It's just more just like, do I feel like I'm at a level to speak with my fellow core members who have more experience in terms of the profession, and I'm still trying to navigate what I'm trying to do. I'm still learning, right? I think every day is a new day for me, and I'm trying to figure out what the best methods and ways to not only work with my students, but also with my peers, right? Also with senior administration, what does it look like? Like, where do I fit in the puzzle piece? Turning back to lived experiences as a Latino male, I've been in spaces where, again, a room full of white people, and I put my input about my lived experience, and I get well, you don't understand. I was like, what do you mean I don't understand? Right? You're talking about students that 90% lived in the same city as me,
right.
right? They're Latino. We might be different ethnicities, but for some reason, I don't get it. And it kind of bothered me at times. Where it was just like, okay, I understand that you want to do the white savior aspect and help these students out. And I can admire that you want to provide the right resource for these students. To tell me that I don't understand or anything. And again, everyone's story is different. I'm not going to say I'm 100% with every student, right? But I need to have a good ground foundation of what they're probably experiencing, especially those individuals being in a predominantly white institution, what that like, right? So, I mean, those are moments that, you know, hurt me. Not, I don't want to say hurt me, but it got me thinking about, wow, no matter who I am, I'm not going to be validated on what I have from my experiences. But at the end of the day, when September 15th comes around every year,
Yes.
talk about me about Hispanic Heritage Month. You are the
Right.
expert about celebration and cultural awareness. What speakers should we bring? What should we do? Uh, hey, maybe throughout the year you can talk about your, again, going back to food, fun, and fashion. Let me know what that looks like, right? But
Right.
but the moment I start questioning any structure, or anything that might impede the success of a student outside the essence of the enriched environment, the co-curricular, the having fun. And I always tell students, I'm trying to make sure you get an A outside the classroom because, college is more than just what's in the classroom, more
Oh,
development and cultural awareness, but also navigating, personal relationships with individuals. When it comes to that time of the year, I always get prepared 100%. I already have my ideas ready to go because people will just be knocking on my door. But I think as I say that too, it is also an opportunity for me to kind of like open the door for people that may have not known that too. So I
correct.
also understand that I gotta check myself also in terms of like my potential emotions behind that.
Right.
Um, some people might think it's a performative and they're asking me to do that, and sure, whatever. Here's an opportunity for me to kind of continue on and creating the visibility. But I never know. Maybe that one moment might open someone's eyes about who we are and who we are as a culture, right? And I think that's kind of what I admire about the Super Bowl this past weekend, right?
Yes.
The tension behind that halftime show was at an enormous rate, right? Because I think it obviously had a little bit of political aspect behind that, but overall, I think some people left there being like, okay, I kind of like that music. Didn't understand it, but I like the vibe. I like these people and everything like that. And I think that's ultimately the goal we're trying to do. And I think overall, I think the message that Bad Bunny had at the end, we together we are America, was an opportunity for people to kind of have the idea of we can kind of bring our cultures together, bring our rituals. I think overall, although you and I, I'm Colombian by, heritage and you're Puerto Rican, right?
Mhm.
We have some rituals that are similar. That
100%.
also like,
Yes.
my neighbor who's Asian, my neighbor who's white, my neighbor who's black, like we all have similar rituals and localities to one another that we can come together as people. And I think overall, we can all celebrate on that part. But going back into the original question you're asking, I think it's very interesting because my expertise is not just, celebration and the awareness part. My expertise is at an institutional level is data driven. Like I have some data points for you that are first person. And not only that, I interact with students on a daily basis. I can give you better data points for you to bring your institution at different levels, right? And strategic thinking and recruitment and access and retention that I can provide for you aside from, your typical September 15th to October 15th.
What you are describing, I kind of like categorize as convenient access to the culture versus continuous access to the culture. And I think that's what we got to call it because I think that that's what it is. It's like, oh, wait a minute, you're important when we want to celebrate things to let people know that we want people to think that we honor, but you and I both know that in order to honor any population, you don't only do it when it's National Fill in the Blank Month.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, when you
That is performative at its best. And then the 11 months, you gaslight people when they want to hold space to say, you know what? I can do both things. I can honor my culture, my race, my gender, all the intersectionalities of my social identities. And it doesn't take away from anybody or anything. That's other people's things that they're trying to impose. That's how I see it.
Yeah, and as you said, I think overall it's just like the system has created it in the sense where you only celebrate it once a month, right? So we created the culture of it being performative rather than kind of what you're saying. Let's celebrate all 12 months, right? And I think
Right.
the fact that everyone has fought, to get their month in a sense, right? It's a blessing and a curse, right? Because then like we have
Correct.
our month, but then like everyone forgets about it after that, where it shouldn't be that way. And I think a lot of the times people just have a difficulty understanding how to actually intersect all those social identities into a yearly thing. What does that look like?
Correct.
I know I try to push my student groups, especially the Black student groups and my Latino organizations, just like, hey, why don't you talk about Afro Latinos, right? That's a
Correct.
good, what does that look like, right? And
Correct.
what are we talking about in terms of like the generations of BIPOC individuals here, right? Or even Latinos, the No Sabo generation. Like, what does that look like? Let's talk about that. So I think overall, like we have fought to get that month, but at the same time, it's a good time. I think overall the conversation is it's a balance, right? And it's finding the right balance behind that, and it's hard to tightrope that. I know I can't tightrope anything, but like it's hard, right? Emotional thing that you got to go through.
Yeah, I think, this past weekend with the Bad Bunny concert or the Benito concert, the Benito Bowl, I think for me, because I wanted to kind of, scream out loud. Like, culture is not the enemy. Think about that, right?
Well,
So, and the reason why I say that, because I know as the show went on from like the opening scene of people in the sugar canes, picking the sugar canes, boom, you had my attention. And every image, for those of us who understand, spoke loudly of this is who we are. This is what we're about. This is a snapshot into this richness of culture. And I kind of feel like I was telling some of my siblings when we were talking about the show, I said, wow, I don't think I've ever seen any show represent like it's almost like a flash of my life as a kid and all my experiences, both on the island and here on the mainland. Because in the diaspora, we recreate our communities that we're used to and that is home for us, right? So that's why we have these pockets. That's why we have these pockets in Chicago, right? That's why we have these pockets in New York. That's why we have these pockets here in Springfield. I mean, there are these pockets for a reason. And I thought, again, culture is not the enemy. And that's why people were able to, those who kind of are open. So, again, not everybody's closed minded. Those are, to me, the people who are closed minded, that's not the audience that this show was for to begin with. This is to celebrate, right? And if you understand the language of, what Benito said, love and celebrate and honor culture, that's a good thing, right? I
yeah,
just kind of felt that what I saw was something that I know my parents, if they were alive, God rest their souls, that I think that they would have been, they don't care for his music type,
yeah,
but that the lyrics to his music, for those people out there who don't understand Spanish, I would encourage, go get a translator, go get Google Translator and understand the poetic power and truth behind every lyric and every song that was performed.
mhm,
And that was just a snapshot. Like he's been doing that for years. He's been around for a little bit. So I thought for me, wow, what a way to kind of say, this is us acknowledging the culture.
absolutely,
Even when other people are saying we're not part of what? The dominant culture. It's like we can hold spaces. It's been said at nauseum in all posts and, articles. And it talks about, we can hold space that, on a global level, most major power countries, people are learning multiple languages, not two. Here, it's an issue that you can't hold space of holding on to your identity without selling out, as you said earlier, to assimilate to some narrative of this is what we should be. But that's that same narrative that still holds Puerto Rico hostage over colonialism that's alive and well today. There's a reason why when Bad Bunny was up on those power poles, everyone who understands should have automatically thought, oh, Hurricane Maria, power grid, it's been that way. It's still that way. And our president then was throwing paper towels like it was a gift.
yeah. There's a lot of opportunities for people to learn and understand. I think overall, those who generally want to learn more, probably dug a little bit deeper in understanding what the show was and what he was trying to communicate to the general public in its sense, right? But overall, there's some people that are just not going to care, and that's just not their forte. And and we can't get everyone. We got to give some grace on
Agreed.
that. And I think overall, it's like if we gained another person or
Correct.
people to be part of the group, welcome, have your cafecito ready to go too, and we can
Amen. Love it. Yeah. So I know, Peter, what I wanted to say is I'm glad that, we've had, we did deep dives, right, into some of these topics because I think for me, what I try to do is when I have guests is really design questions to invite the reflection, right? I'm not asking for give me the right answer because that's not what we should be talking about. I'm not about this episode. I'm about all the time. What I'm really was looking for is something to say, here's a perspective maybe people haven't heard. And I think it's okay because if the space doesn't allow us to share what we've just shared with each other, then people are going to look for it outside of the spaces. And I just hope that people understand that the creation and the questions that come to the surface when it comes to this podcast and every episode, it truly is about really being committed into having these talks or these conversations. And in my culture, that cafecito, like you just pointed out, was really important, right? So how many great, amazing, hard, bad, funny conversations? I can't count how many of those I've had over a cup of cafecito. And that's why Conversation Cafe made the most sense to me. So I just want to kind of say, I really appreciate your time and effort to kind of just engage in this conversation. And I think the last thing I wanted to ask you one more question, but do you have any other closing comments before my last question to you?
No, I think overall, kind of what you said. I think aside from cafecito, like people have their tea,
Yeah.
people have their water cool talk, right? Like we all have that ritual. Going back on rituals,
Yes.
like we all have similar things that we come together and those are the best times to kind of just brainstorm on what are we trying to do, right? And I think overall, with the work that I do, and I know it's really hyper focused on either the Latino culture or speaking about BIPOC individuals, something like that. My other essence, and kind of going back at balancing it out, is trying to find the allies and where they're at, right? How can
Right.
we together? How can we collaborate? How can you be a mentor, a sponsor? What does that look like? Can you be the catalyst for change and help me out? And overall, I think it's a partnership that we have to have, right? And I think we can't do this alone. Insert cliche of just like it takes a village or together we'll go further. I think overall it's just understanding that, this is my current career path, right? But also at the same time, like I do want to educate, my fellow white students or colleagues, right, about what we do. I invite them to programs that will make them uncomfortable because I want them to be comfortable. And hopefully at the end of the day, I learn something from them also. Like I think
Correct.
that's the cool thing about me growing up. At first I didn't understand it, but my parents wanted to make sure that I had a good foundation of where I came from, being Colombian and my older brothers being born there too, but also my brothers understanding, when they immigrated here, like, assimilating into the culture because they went through
Yeah.
some stuff, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I think it's just like I've had the good opportunity to dive into both worlds, but at the same time, I think for me, there were moments where like I don't really fit in either one of these. How do I actually really
Yeah.
navigate through the situation? And that's something I still continue on through my own progress and development is where do I really fit in. But I think overall, what I've come to appreciate more is I have to really embrace where I come from. That's being born in New England and Massachusetts, and my identities are several and multi-layered. And what does that look like? And how can I actually bring though that expertise right to the job that I do and what can I also do? And I've been lucky to live in Los Angeles, Miami, and Indianapolis to get more of a national
Yeah.
experience. And what does it look like? Being Latino, Miami, in Indianapolis, and Los Angeles, three different experiences that I'm not prepared for. I was prepared for the food
Of course.
and fun and the fashion and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in terms of like lived experiences that those individuals go through, I was like, oh, this is a different ballgame, and trying to understand where they're coming from was very enlightening. That I try to bring here at this institution or anyone I interact with.
Well, again, I appreciate that, Peter. Thank you so much. I know what I'd like to do is ask two last questions, right? So, if institutions were truly committed to developing equitable leaders, what is one practice they would have to stop defending and one form of lived experiences they would finally have to trust?
Oh, that's a good question. As you said that, I generally thought of a situation that happened with me in my career. I think it's stop defending the tradition of following the certain pathway, the higher ed pathway, right?
Yes.
The leadership pipeline,
Hmm.
you need to have certain credentials, right? For
Yes.
for us to even look at you. And I think overall, there's gatekeepers to that, right? And when I say
Yes.
that, the gatekeepers are looking at what institutions did you go study at? Where did you get your experience? And how are we then going to translate that into a specific leader that we want? You're just creating like-minded individuals at this point and not kind of expressing or providing a space for diverse thinking. Now, I'm
Right.
not even talking like just thinking in itself, right? Uh, I, there's some things- I think I've been in a situation, and I know I've been in a situation where I wasn't looked at for a possible promotion because it was well, he needs to go up the hierarchy of higher ed. He needs to follow
Yes.
this position, and this position before he's even provided that, right? And
Correct.
kind of just taking away the experience I had. I worked in nonprofit stuff, right? Nonprofit organizations, and I've done a lot of stuff here and there, but there was a certain pathway that certain individuals want to keep within higher ed. And I'm pretty sure that happens at other organizations and everything like that. But it literally took one individual who was just like, I don't really care about that. He got some talent. It looks like he can bring a different style of thinking. Let's put him in that position and do it right now. Obviously, that added a little pressure to me, and just like I got to live up to expectations. But
Of course.
it's hard because it's like not everyone's going to have the right resources, and it's equitable to follow that pathway, right? And you're just going to create same people, and not only that, you'll then mold them into what you want them to be. All right.
Correct.
So if you want to be stagnant in terms of how your organization, your office looks like, fine, but then you're not providing that space for people to think differently and provide difference because you are catering to a diverse population of individuals, right? So you want to try to have those opportunities to create that space. And I think that's a hard part of that. You just sort of stop defending that merit aspect, right? It's just here's an
Right.
opportunity that if you see some, if you know, when people see some
Right.
talent and they have the right skills and values, give them a shot. You
Right.
know, there's no harm or foul. And I think as I say that, I think it's making sure that you provide the right structure for this person to succeed, right? I think a lot of the
Correct.
times people are placed into be like, I want them to fail, right? So it's right. The other point. So I
Yes.
think what institution needs to
Yes.
finally do is to trust, right? And I think when I say this, it's overall the notion of just like, don't think of resiliency as just like, that's cute, that's nice. Think of
Right.
resiliency as an opportunity to think about, wow, this person is politically savvy. They know how to navigate through the system. They know how to decode the unwritten rules. They're also an individual that can strategically think because like I said, that's all I do is I think about the future, right? I think
Yes.
about what these things are to impact me and my students moving on, right? And how's that going to be a great experience for them? So like that resiliency, although it is a true value, but it also is more layered in that. Like I had to go through some stuff to understand what I'm doing now. So I
Right.
think it's more understanding that that idea or that value it comes something that you can't teach. You can't teach that, and you can't teach resiliency. If you teach resiliency, let me know, and
No.
I can take that class. And also, you
We
can't
can
teach that way.
no, you can't. We can bottle it. That's what we can do. We can bottle it and it'd be
Yeah,
the
so I guess
best selling ever.
it's just trusting that individual
Yeah.
that has gone through some stuff, and I think because of that, they understand different intricacies to be successful. And I think a lot of people don't weigh on that. I think people are just like, oh, you know, that like I said, that's cute. You survived and you've everything. But like there's certain skills that come out of that when someone's not pushed and faced through that, they're never gonna understand. I think is just trust the process, right? Trust
Yeah.
the experience that they had and give them an opportunity, right? So I think it's easy to say, but obviously you are trying to make the right decisions for your institution. But I think a lot of people fear outcomes and don't want to take the risk either. You know, so fear that they're
Yes.
going to lose some sort of like part of what the tradition is of an institution, but also they don't
Yes.
want to risk because it's their reputation also, right? And I think a true leader or at least a leader that's courageous enough will take those risks. I think when I say that, empower them, right? I think that's the other issue too. I think individuals and myself, it's are you getting me to be career ready to survive or to empower me? I think most of the time, as a person of color, it's you got to survive this. You're gonna be thrown into this haunted house. You're gonna see some ghosts of your past and your ancestors, and you got to survive this and everything. Versus like, here are the tools. Go into this haunted house. Do what you could. Go be Ghostbuster, whatever the situation,
Love it.
and be successful.
Yeah, I think I again I want to say I appreciate the layers in in this conversation and the vulnerability that you put forth. 'Cause I think this is where there's this misunderstanding that vulnerability equals weakness, which again, you know, at the top, when we start talking about authentic leadership, it's been at least I remember being grilled. Authentic leadership means, and then that's one thing, but then when you see it play out, there's kind of a misalignment. No, it's not kind of. There is a misalignment. So I think for me, it really is enlightening when I hear people share their experiences. Because again, if you're experiencing that, more than likely someone else is. And I'm not talking about someone who's within in our own communities. I'm not talking about, you know, people from the BIPOC communities. Of course, you know, don't think it's you. Understand that the system will continuously question you until you find the right ally that gets it. And then what I'm hoping is that through these conversations that we have, that people pick up some carrots in order for them to go into something prepared to ask the right questions. Because I think even when you're interviewing, to your point earlier, when you're interviewing, you're not only interviewing for the job, you're also interviewing that organization to see if that's where you want to spend your expertise and your time and all the you know the time that we spend at work. So I think for me, I just want to thank you for that. And I want to segue into the last thing that I would like from you is if audience members, I mean, again, you dropped some great knowledge and maybe someone's listening like, hey, you know, when Peter said this really spoke to me. Can you share if audience members want to create a community with you? What is the best way for them to do so?
Go off of my Ghostbuster. Who are you gonna call? You can,
Dum-dum.
yeah, don't call me. I don't have a telephone for that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. yeah, or find me on Brandeis Intercultural Center. My email is there, Peter Rojas at brandeis.edu. I mean, there's any ways to connect. I think I'm very in different ways that we can connect. I think it's different platforms serve different purposes. I think for this podcast, LinkedIn, let me know. I just
Oh, good.
posted an article, recently about Bad Bunny and how that kind of had a reflection time for me to think about, my past 20 years and understanding, Pan Americanism and we are united together. And that stems a lot from my brotherhood and that I participate in as an organization. Feel free to contact me any way, shape, or form. Ask me any questions. I'm not going to say I have all the answers, but I think I've had enough lived experiences, whether it's a student, person in general, or just a person in higher education, to provide some sort of advice here and there. And again, overall, I think the last piece of advice to get to people is just, the difference between making time and having time. So if you do want to change the current state of your life right now, make some time to get to know myself or you too. Right. I
Right.
think what you
Right.
have going on with this podcast is very enlightening. And I think people just need to just take the time and listen. Right. And see what tidbits we're saying here to kind of gravitate and make you reflect on that part. But also, I think know your worth. That's really
Amen.
I think that's what I'm gonna put to people there is just know your worth and understand your limits too. There's a balance, and I will say again, the balance is very hard, right?
Yes, it is.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown, right? It really is. Right?
Yes.
It's we're all kings and queens here, and we're trying to be the best version of ourselves every day. So I think what you got here going on is super great, and I'm glad that you invited me to have this conversation.
Well, thank you, sir. Muchas gracias, mi hermano. I really appreciate, again, you just saying yes. Because I think that's part of it. It's like sometimes people feel like, is this a gotcha? Right? And I'm like, no, it's not a gotcha. It really is the space that you wish you had at work or at home or in your community that you can actually just express without feeling like you're going to get cut off, interrupted, or gaslit.
Yeah,
Right? This really is, well, you don't have to like what I'm saying, but I'm going to share my perspective and my experience, and no one can take that away. So for that, I appreciate, again, the boldness of just being vulnerable and sharing. So with that being said, Peter, bastante gracias. And until next time, adios. And everybody out there, please take care. Gracias.
thank you.
Thank you for spending this time with us at Conversation Café. This is a space where we slow down, reflect, and engage meaningful dialogue about leadership, resilience, and the realities of shaping our communities and workplaces. So if today's conversation resonated with you, we invite you to keep the dialogue going. Be sure to like this episode, subscribe to the show, and share it with a colleague, friend, or fellow leader who believes in building stronger and more equitable institutions. You can follow Conversation Cafe and stay connected with up and coming conversations, live panels, and new episodes on our social channels. We are now on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Substack. Just search for Conversation Cafe by Avant Consulting and Training to join our growing community and thoughtful leaders and changemakers. We also encourage you to leave a review or comment. Your feedback helps us expand this space for authentic dialogue and ensures these conversations reach the people who need them the most. And remember, leadership isn't just about titles or positions, it's about the everyday choices we make to listen deeply, challenge systems that limit others, and create environments where people can lead with authenticity and purpose. So, wherever you are, at work, in your community, or in moments of reflection, ask yourself, what kind of leader does this moment call for? Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep showing up for the conversation that matters. This has been Conversation Cafe. And at Conversation Cafe, every voice has a seat at the table.